Bloody Elbow presents The Mookie and Crookie Show, a spin-off of the Level Change podcast that goes a little more in-depth on major combat sports news, as well as takes a humorous look at the crazy world of combat sports social media. Here are your hosts, Mookie Alexander and Steffi Haynes. Welcome to episode 134 of the Mookie and Crookie Show. I'm your host, Mookie Alexander, joined as always by Steffi Haynes, and this week we'll discuss what happened with Bellator and PFL's main events, plus news on Sean O'Malley's possible next fight, Yoel Romero's Bellator debut, take two, Jordan Williams rescuing his car from a thief, and much more. But first, how's it going, Steffi?
It's going great. I had an awesome, relaxing weekend. Got to see some fights on Friday. Not exactly looking forward to this upcoming card because it's a little light on name value. I mean, there's 3 fights on there that are good, and the rest out of 13 could be better, but I'm still looking forward to the weekend. It's funny, I start Monday, and I'm ready to get to the weekend immediately. Just jump right over the rest of the days.
Well, I'm just glad the heat wave is over. The only reason why it wasn't as bad as a couple months ago is that just like last year, the wildfire smoke did a really, really good job of blocking out the sun those last couple of days. So we were getting the worst of both worlds in a way, but that bit is over. And yeah, I didn't really have the weekend off. I took Sunday off pretty much, but Friday I worked the PFL card. And then Saturday I had a Seahawks preseason game to cover. But this week, we got PFL Thursday, Bellator on Friday, and boy, I know who isn't waiting for Czech Congo's Sergey Kharitonov. And then Saturday's UFC show, not the greatest, but I got to say, the bout order is whacked.
Yes,
like, why is Pantoja versus Royval opening the main card, and Clay Guida is co-headlining a UFC card in 2021?
And Chase Sherman is above that? Ugh.
The flyweight disrespect continues. We see you. You haven't killed off the division. You don't plan to, but doesn't mean that you're eager to actually promote it. And then, of course, what I will most likely be covering is not the UFC on Saturday. It'll be Pacquiao's fight against Yordenis Ugas. So if you didn't know, Ugas is replacing Errol Spence, who just came off of surgery to correct a retinal tear. And we don't know the timetable yet, but I hope it's not that super serious type of retinal tear.
All retinal tears are super serious. And once you have one, you really need to take a lot of time off. Boxers, fighters that get retinal tears, it almost always ends up getting torn again. Ask Michael Bisping, ask Alan Belcher. I really don't like to see boxers come back from that. Because they're putting themselves at risk for further damage. But that's the breaks. Sugar Ray Leonard managed to do it and still cement himself as a legend after a retinal tear. So maybe Errol Spence can do it too. Science has progressed quite a bit, but I always default back to Michael Bisping because that was all result of 2 retinal tears.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So with Errol Spence, that's a bummer because I think that would have been a pretty good selling pay-per-view. Mm-hmm. Ugas, I think, has the potential to upset Pacquiao, but it might also be a less entertaining fight than Pacquiao versus Spence would be. It's more winnable for Pacquiao, to say the least, but if he was hoping for a big payday, I think that took a hit in his pockets. But he clearly just needs any money he can get.
Indeed, when you have a 900 plus person entourage that you take everywhere with you, a political career and tax issues, yeah, I think you do need some money.
Yeah, Matt, that's going to be a busy day in Vegas because the UFC card's in the Apex. Pacquiao Ugas is at T-Mobile Arena, and then SummerSlam is at the big stadium, Allegiant Stadium there.
Wow, so, I forgot all about SummerSlam being the same weekend. Good Lord, Vegas is going to be doing serious business.
Yeah, good thing they had that mask mandate early because I'm sure everybody's absolutely going to comply with that.
Could be in Texas. which means no one is even required to wear a mask. I mean, the Supreme Court just overturned a judge in Dallas that wanted to put a mask mandate down, and the Supreme Court says, no, you can't do it.
My God. What more can be said about Texas and Florida, really? Mm-hmm. It's too bad that they make up a good portion of our country's population. But anyway, let's get things started by plug in SoundCloud. You just go to the SoundCloud app on your phone or on the SoundCloud website. You type in Bloody Elbow Presents. in the search bar. And then once you find us, which shouldn't be that difficult, you hit subscribe and you get yourself free Bloody Elbow Presents podcast content for 6 days of the week. So no UFC last weekend, a rare off week, and they'll be off again September the 11th, but that's going to be De La Hoya Belfort week for us. Brace for impact. But there was still MMA on Friday nights. I mentioned PFL and Bellator. So we'll talk PFL first because these are the playoffs. These are the semifinals for the right to go to the final, get that $1 million prize at the end of a long, grueling season. And Ray Cooper III really just dominated Rory McDonald. And perhaps the only surprising thing is that it wasn't that exciting to watch because we know Cooper is a super exciting fighter. But in Cooper's defense, a lot of that had to do with a very defensive-minded approach by Rory. And not to take anything away from Cooper, who fought a very smart fight, out-wrestled McDonald, showed how strong he is. And, of course, he outstruck Rory, too. It really feels like that fight signified the end of the line for Rory as a super relevant fighter.
Indeed. Not just super relevant, plain old relevant. He's, wow, he was on his back by choice, it seemed like, because he kept trying to spam takedowns against a guy that was way, way stronger than him. And that fight, that was just a mauling. Good Lord. We were so wrong when we picked this fight. Good on Victor because he saw this coming and he was right.
Yeah, he was. Certainly, we thought, okay, Cooper's grappling from the bottom might be an issue, but Roy never even came close to getting on top. So that was a problem. And I can't recall a time when I've seen Rory, other than the Mousasi fight. So at welterweight, Rory get that easily outmuscled.
Yeah.
And that was a concerning bit for me. But also super concerning from Rory's point of view is that in the few striking exchanges that did happen, I did not like, how Rory reacted to getting hit. And this has been a thing with me for a while, ever since that second Lawler fight, that they basically beat the primes out of each other. And we've seen what happened with Rory because with Lawler, rather. The Rory fight happened and then the Condit fight happened right after that. The Condit fight might have been it for Robbie, but for Rory, undoubtedly, the second Lawler fight changed him forever. And when he got hit, he was panic wrestling. And that tells you a lot. So I got a feeling that McDonald is going to stick around MMA for a few more fights if he can try and get another run at the PFL welterweight tournament. But it feels closer to him needing to retire.
Yeah, he's been in the game since he was 16 years old. He's had a very, very long career, and he's had a lot of really big battles in there.
Yeah, and that is one of the cautionary tales, and this can apply to boxing, I suppose, as well, but one of the cautionary tales in general, starting as a professional so young, because Jordan Mean also started at 15, 16 years old, and he's burned out by the time he's 30.
Yeah. And Rory's, 32 now?
Yeah, thereabouts. And he looks like 10, 15 years older in fight years.
He really does. Absolutely. But he has a wife and a little girl and bills and a house. So we're going to be expecting Rory to stick around for several more years because that's how fighters, that's just basically how their lives go.
Yeah. And for Rory, it's kind of a luck of the draw thing when you're in PFL. Because there could have been another situation where somehow Ray Cooper doesn't even make the playoffs, or on the other side of the bracket, Magomed Karamov isn't part of the tournament at all. And Roy would be one of the favorites, but he is in there against guys who can absolutely beat him. Even if he somehow got to the final, I'm pretty sure Magomed Karamov would just thoroughly out-wrestle him and beat him up too. And one of the warning signs we should have gotten about Rory and how much left he had in the tank was not the Mousasi beating, because we've obviously knows that Rory's not a middleweight, but the John Fitch fight, he arguably lost. Yeah. And John Fitch is about as unviolent as he can get in MMA. And he had a hard time there. But we've also gotten the sense that Rory, he feels conflicted about fighting in general.
Yeah, he came out and said, right after he left the UFC, came out and said that he didn't know if he had it in him, that he didn't like hurting people anymore.
Yeah, and at this stage of his career, this is 2 losses in a row, although no sensible person no sensible person believes he lost the T-Bout fight.
Right.
But still, a few years ago, Roy McDonald would destroy T-Bow and stop him comfortably. For McDonald, it feels like the end of the line for him as being considered one of the tops in the business. But for Ray Cooper III, man, if he does win this tournament again, meaning avenges his 2018 loss to Magomed, boy, I just want to see him in the UFC.
Yeah.
I don't care if he doesn't end up being a top 5 fighter in UFC competition. I think he can be top 15. And he's a super talented and super strong fighter for somebody who basically trains with his family in his garage.
Yeah. It's incredible.
It really is incredible. They're built tough in Hawaii, man.
They sure are. Them boys can scrap.
Yep, it's just a nation of scrappers. One of these days we'll get to the UFC in Hawaii. We had Bellator in Hawaii, but got to get the UFC there at some point. But before we move on to Bellator, hard luck for Clay Collard because I thought he won that fight against Raush Manfio.
He did.
And the irony is that Collard has had this underdog tag for dating, including his boxing career. He was the favorite in this fight and he ends up losing. And Manfio has kind of bullshitted his way to the final because that's the second time he's gotten a favorable decision in this setup. But man, the judging was whack. The judging was whack. I feel like Collard should have won, but I had a sneaking suspicion that they wouldn't give him that second round, even though he got a late takedown. He was ripping Manfio to the body, and he ended up in full mount and was threatening a rear naked choke. I guess that wasn't enough.
Guess not. You know what? These Texas judges are traveling around and spitting out all of these questionable decisions.
They must be, but this card was in Florida, so it's not like they have.
They're traveling around to different states just so that they could give out these crazy ass decisions.
We've got like a super team of shitty judging going on right now.
We do. It's crazy. I hate it because it's been a solid month and a half of just every single card has had some wackadilly judging on it.
Yeah, and if you watch the pre-fight feature on Collard, it's hard not to root for the guy.
Yeah.
And it was really easy to root for him last year when the bubble shut everything down, because it was supposed to be, the bubble didn't shoot everything. It was COVID, but last year he was in the top-ranked bubble, and the reason for that was he was supposed to be in PFL for 2020, but when everything was shut down and PFL punted 2020 season, he ended up doing a bunch of boxing matches, and he got a little bit of a cult following in boxing because he was doing really well.
Indeed. Yes, he was.
But for not a lot of money. So it would have been nice to see him get that $1 million or have a chance at $1 million.
Yeah.
Yep. So let's get to Bellator's main event. It was a good card. It was a better card. I picked the wrong card to cover, obviously, because all the PFL tournament fights ended in a decision. But Bellator, Gegard Mousasi got the third round TK over John Salter. That was pretty predictable. Salter was selling out for takedowns, looking to out-grapple Gegard. But he's the wrestler grappler with the suspect gas tank. So he faded out and Mousasi got the stoppage. But for some reason, something's bothering me with that Mousasi performance to that. It did not look great while still easily winning.
At the end of the first round, when Mousasi was he was on top and he was landing some ground and pound, was that not the slowest ground and pound you've ever seen? It looked like he was freaking underwater. There was a time when Mousasi would have mowed down the John Salters of the world, because that's not a guy that would have typically given him a problem. I'm not saying that he hasn't lost to guys he shouldn't have lost to, but he definitely wouldn't have lost to the John Salters. And while he did win, and he was dominant, Salter had his moments in there, and I just can't get over how slow he looked with that ground and pound. Now, when it got to the third round and he was landing, he had sped up a little bit, because I feel like maybe he sensed his own gas tank fading a little, and he needed to really lay it on so he could get the fight stopped. But still, he won, and that's that. But it doesn't look like the Gegard Mousasi of old, and he too has been in the game for a very long time.
Well, instead of the Gegard Mousasi of old, it's just the old Gegard Mousasi. He just turned 36 2 weeks ago. So he's been in this sport a very, very long time. Yeah. Probably since, 2002, 2003? Yeah. So 18 years as a professional. And while he's not been in a lot of wars that would really accelerate his decline, and he's rarely been knocked out, just the Uriah Hall fight, for somebody who was never a speed demon in the first place, he did not look like 100% Gegard Mousasi that we've come to expect. And even in his Bellator reign in general, it's kind of been up and down. Like that Shlemenko fight in his Bellator debut, that was a pretty difficult fight. And if I recall correctly, his eye messed up in that fight too.
Yes, he did. And also, the thing that we also need to remember, while he's only been knocked out in competition the one time, we don't know what his training environment is like. So we don't know what kind of battles he's had, whether he's been dropped. We don't know anything about that. So I automatically add a few years to their fight years just because of what I don't know happens behind closed doors.
That is true. We certainly known enough tales through interviews that we've conducted and interviews just in general and fighter admissions that some gyms take it light and others like to treat them like real fights.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, over where the Black Zillions, which is now Sanford MMA, they have meet night. I mean, that is crazy to me to have full contact sparring with no headgear. What in the world? That just seems ridiculous, but that's what they do.
Yep. And then compare that with Max Holloway, who most recently said he stopped doing that type of sparring.
Yeah, I like
or cut down on it.
I think that's great. He's a smart kid.
Yeah, he really is. So getting back to Mousasi, I mentioned the Shlemenko fight and how difficult that was, but you look great against Carvalho and then just own Rory McDonald. But these last four fights, Lovato Jr., he lost the fight and lost his belt. And sadly, Rafael had the condition that led him to retire. The Machida rematch was atrocious. Terrible fight, split decision. The Douglas Lima fight, again, terrible fight. He clearly won it, but it was just really bad to watch and so slow paced. And then Salter, that's still not the type of fighter who beats him, just extremely one-dimensional grappler. And Salter essentially had to sell out for a finish early or else he was always going to fade, which he did. So next for Mousasi would be Austin Vanderford, who, Mr. Van Zandt, I guess he is he's known as, but he's a good fighter. I mean, he's not a world beater by any means, but at this stage of his career, it feels like a good time to fight Mousasi.
And it also seems like a fight that he could possibly win, too.
Yeah, especially if he relies quite heavily on his wrestling. He's not a dangerous finisher or anything like that, but you never know with Mousasi because I think he isn't the same. He's not as good as he used to be. And Vanderford is a younger, fresher talent.
Indeed. And somebody in that family has got to bring home the bacon.
Yeah, they badly need a win, a big win just for that household. And I think Vanderford has got a big opportunity in front of him. But, Mousasi's kind of getting ahead of himself because he mentioned he'd love to fight the winner of the light heavyweight Grand Prix, which would be one of Vadim Nemkov, Rumble, who are the other two? Ryan Bader and Corey Anderson. I got to say, if it's Nemkov, Mousasi has got no chance.
None whatsoever. And Bader, even this faded version of Bader could possibly beat him.
Yeah, that's the thing. I probably, other than Anthony Johnson, and even that's a little dicey, but other than Anthony Johnson, I'm pretty sure I picked the other three to beat Mousasi at 205.
Yeah, I agree. That Mousasi is not our Mousasi.
Nope. But he believes in science, so he's on our team.
Yes, he is. Team science. Woohoo.
It's sad that we even got to say that in a serious matter. My God. Like we got to give him a medal. A medal of sanity.
Yes. Oh my God, that is so crazy. But that's truth. That's truth. In the fight community, I feel like we do need to issue out medals for sanity.
Yes, we do. So if you didn't catch the full Bellator card, you got two fights you should check out. Koreshkov beating the hell out of Sabah Homasi.
Oh my God. And I was so wrong on that.
I don't know what kept Homasi up. And then Rafian Stotts Magomed Magomedov fight. Oof. That was a great fight.
Yes,
Stotts should get a title shot. I mean, bantamweight is so good in so many promotions that I wish that we could just do one giant Grand Prix where everybody puts up their best bantamweights across however many promotions for one super tournament. It'll never happen, but the fantasy MMA fan of me would love that.
Yes, I would love that too. Hey, Scott Coker has thrown down the gauntlet several times asking for it. Now, I know that it'll never happen, but I love that he's still saying it. Hey, I'm open to it. Come on.
Yeah, nobody else is really doing it.
Nope.
So he might as well just keep shooting a shot, even if he's just shooting at the air.
Yeah, spraying the seed. sorry. When you said the way you put it, it just made me the 13-year-old in me come out.
Finally lowering yourself down to my age. All right,
yes.
great.
Okay, so anyways, we do have to move on here. And our first story involves Sean O'Malley. And I can't believe I'm going to say this, but recent comments by Sean O'Malley are actually quite smart. I have to put that out there before we jump into this story. But he recently said that he was looking for winnable fights with unranked fighters for the remainder of his contract because his contract pays him the same purse whether he fights Louis Smolka or Petr Yan. And I have been trying to drill this for the longest time, and I know you have too. I know many of us have been trying to get this across, that just because you win a fight of the night or a performance of the night bonus, that doesn't mean you get to go back and renegotiate your contract. It doesn't work that way. Maybe it works that way for your John Joneses and your champions, your Izzy Adesanyas, even your Conor McGregors, but it doesn't work for Sean O'Malley's, and it doesn't work for Cheyenne Bays, okay? You have to get that through your head. Now, this next story, though, is about him possibly being thwarted on that because it looks like they're looking to make a fight with him and number 8 ranked Frankie Edgar. Now, currently, Sean O'Malley is not in the bantamweight rankings, but Frankie Edgar is ranked number 8. And according to Ariel Helwani, and I quote, "The UFC wants to book Sean O'Malley versus Frankie Edgar next, maybe even for the Madison Square Garden show on November 6th, to be determined on if it will happen." Now, while I think this is a good fight for both guys, it's a litmus test for both guys as well. It will tell us where Sean O'Malley is and where Frankie Edgar is. Whether it happens, just like Ariel said, it's up in the air, but I kind of would like to see where things stand for both guys. I don't know that Sean O'Malley will want to turn it down because you know how the UFC works. When you start turning down fights, they put you on a shelf or they bury you against somebody super tough in the middle of the bottom half of the prelims. And they let you sink or swim, basically, but they let you do it in a part of the show that traditionally isn't as watched. So those are the breaks for Sean O'Malley right now. And if I were him, I think I would take this fight.
I would take this fight. It's very winnable for him because even though Edgar might have one more performance akin to what he did against Yair Rodriguez, I'm not going to bank on that all these years later, and with him coming off another brutal knockout loss. And for as much as O'Malley is a bit of an irritant of a personality, and there's certainly a lot more stuff we could get into with him and his associations with certain people, he's a talented fighter, and he's so much faster than Edgar.
Yeah. And
he is so much sharper with his hands that I can see Edgar just getting chewed up because it takes very little for Edgar to get his face busted up. But he has a point as far as his contract,
yes,
which is whether he's fighting in a main event spot or he's fighting Louis Smolka, it's the same. This is where there's a big differentiation between your typical MMA contract and your boxing contract. I've seen, and Nash has certainly seen, quite a number of boxing contracts where your pay is largely dependent not just on the opponent quality, but also where you're placed on a card.
Right.
So, for example, there are a couple of contracts that I've seen lately as part of lawsuits where, okay, you get X $1,000 if you're in an 8-round fight on a Showtime Showbox card. But if you're the main event of an ESPN or DAZN or PBC on Fox card, you're going to get a higher minimum purse. And whatever your minimum purse is, that's not necessarily what you're going to get. You could get even more than that if it's a more notable opponent. So with O'Malley, if this was boxing, if he's fighting Louis Smolka, he's getting pretty low pay, and then he's on the early part of the undercard. But if he's fighting Frankie Edgar, he's going to be on his own main event, and he's going to get a significantly higher payday. That's not how it really works in the UFC. You get the escalating contracts, but they escalate in very tiny increments.
Yeah, like $5,000, $10,000, and that's it.
Yeah, if at that. We've seen some that
right.
are like $2,000.
Exactly. But for your Sean O'Malley's, I would estimate that the escalator moves at about 5,000, 7,000 a clip.
Yeah, and as you said, you don't get to just renegotiate after every fight.
Yeah, and
that's what the contract's for.
And here's what really bugs me, Mookie, is I saw someone in the comments on this article on Bloody Elbow saying that a lot of this is probably hyperbole. You have a fighter that has come out and given an interview stating that his pay doesn't change, and people still question it because they want to default to the UFC. And that just boggles my mind.
You don't even need to go to that length. You can just, prior to last year at least, look up random payouts by the Nevada Athletic Commission or any commission that did release payouts publicly, and you will find that a lot of the familiar fighters on the UFC roster, and probably other major MMA promotions as well, the pay tends to be the same, or at least the reported pay tends to be the same, regardless of opponent quality, unless you get into an interim title situation or an actual title fight.
Or unless you have a new contract. That's when we see the incremental changes, is when they actually sign their new contract, when they fought out their previous one, which is going to be what he has to do here. He's going to have to fight out his previous contract. But I love how the minute he says anything, now the UFC is working on thwarting him, because they don't want a homegrown star just fighting in the middle of the rankings and creating all this, not the rankings, in the middle of the cards, not being ranked and creating all this buzz and not move him along, because the UFC wants to exploit anybody that has any kind of following, like Sean O'Malley. Despite what the following is like, which is probably trash, the point is he's gotten himself a grassroots following. They want to capitalize on that.
Yeah, and that's why they would like to do the Edgar fight, because that would be the one of, I don't want to say safer, but one of the more favorable matchups he has against ranked opponents.
Right.
Like, I'm pretty sure Dvalishvili is ranked below Edgar, and Dvalishvili, I would absolutely pick to beat O'Malley.
Me too. But they don't want to do that. And I'm sure he wouldn't want to do that, because that's a very losable fight for him. Nothing he brings could possibly hurt Dvalishvili, because not only is he in constant motion, he is durable as hell.
Durable as hell, and he just goes he is Sir Spam-A-Lot when it comes to takedowns.
And he would probably break both those legs.
Yes, just a couple of hard kicks from good old Merab, and suddenly O'Malley is having to walk very gingerly. But O'Malley's got the right idea. It's just that we don't hear a lot of fighters say it out loud.
That's right, and I'm glad someone has, to at least quell some of these people out there that seem to think that you could just renegotiate your contract on a great performance. That's just not how it works. The UFC is a business. They don't allow these fighters to have any kind of foothold. They've done that in the past with a couple of people, your John Joneses, your Conor McGregors, and look where that's gotten them. Only Conor McGregor is really sitting pretty right now. John Jones is out there sitting out because the UFC is not acquiescing to his every demand. But they're not going to do that. And especially moving forward, they're not going to do that. They have this ESPN deal now that pays them handsomely for every single card. So the pressure is off to create new stars. Now all stars are interchangeable. Look, they took Big Francie, who just won his belt 4.5 months ago, and they've already got an interim belt out there because he wanted 1 extra month. They did the same thing with Adesanya. Whitaker was supposed to fight. He needed 1 extra month too. Look what happened.
Yeah, we get Vettori instead.
Exactly. It's just ridiculous. And if you think that these champions now are not replaceable, you got another thing coming, because the UFC always has somebody waiting.
Yep, they do. I just want to clarify something with O'Malley, is that the fans in us would like to see O'Malley take on ranked opposition.
Yes.
Because you can only fight in the Almeidas and Smolkas originally, then Moutinho's of the world. That runs its course after a while. Like, okay, we get it. He's way better than these guys.
You end up in a Michael Venom Page situation.
Exactly. I was just about to say this becomes the UFC's MVP story.
Yeah.
But from his point of view, it's doesn't matter. If you want me to fight ranked opposition, pay me more.
Exactly. And he's got the right idea. And that's why I led with that, because for all the dumb shit that Sean O'Malley does, he's very smart about the business aspect of this fight game.
Yep. So let's move on to a fight that is happening, or at least we hope happens, because we know how often these things get canceled. September the 18th, San Jose, California. Yoel Romero finally making his Bellator debut at the second time of asking against Phil Davis, Mr. Wonderful. So Romero, former UFC middleweight contender, he hasn't fought at light heavyweight since, get this, 2011, 10 years ago. Remember Rafael Feijão?
Yeah.
And when Feijão knocked him out in a dreadful fight and then just exploded with violence. Yeah, I guess we figured out why Feijão was all that good at the time. So anyway, Romero, 3-fight losing streak, but let's be fair on that 3-fight losing streak. Whitaker, Costa, Adesanya, all 3 of those fights, he either should have gotten the decision or it was close enough that you could have given it to him.
Right.
So he's really still at the top of his game at his age. He was supposed to be in Bellator's light heavyweight Grand Prix. In fact, the quarterfinal matchup I think people were most looking forward to was him against Anthony Johnson. But Romero failed his pre-fight medicals with an eye issue, and that's how Rumble ended up fighting Jose Augusto and almost losing before getting a knockout win. As for Davis, he did compete in the Grand Prix. He lost to Vadim Nemkov by decision, but he used to be the Bellator light heavyweight champion. He beat Liam McGeary, who, by the way, is no longer on the roster. How times have changed. But Davis won that title in 2016, and then he lost to Ryan Bader in their rematch because they fought in the UFC, and I think that was Davis's last UFC fight, actually. Mm-hmm. So Davis versus Romero, Bellator 266. I gotta admit, I think this fight's gonna suck real bad, and I don't really like this matchup.
I don't really like it either. I'm excited to see Romero and Romero only, and we have to really hold our breath because Romero's aging. And remember, guys like him that look just stunning until they don't, and especially when they're fighting later and later in their chronological age. So we've got Romero well into his 40s, and he hasn't fought in a while, and we might just see the devolution of Yoel Romero. So I'm kind of holding my breath. I'm really rooting for him, and I want to see it, but I'm holding my breath because we could see a really faded Yoel Romero, and the thought of that just hurts my feelings.
The problem I have with this fight is we could still get vintage Yoel Romero, and this fight could be a 2-pack of ass.
Yeah.
Because Davis has a history, a very lengthy history of not good fights to watch.
Yeah.
And even Romero has had his fair share of terrible fights, including the Adesanya one, especially that one.
Yeah.
So for Davis, one of his best assets as a fighter is that he is very hard to hurt, and he's never been put away. And it's also what makes his fights almost completely devoid of drama, because he's not one to be a consistent finishing threat. He's gotten a couple of knockouts in Bellator, the Francis Carmon fight I remember, and I think he had a head kick knockout of somebody, might have been Linton Vassell. But more often than not, he is content to be just this patient, not outstanding at any particular thing fighter. And Romero relies on bursts. And really the most exciting Romero fights involve somebody bringing the action to him.
Right. And you're not going to get that with Phil Davis because not only is he comfortable in there, he does not take risks. That is the biggest thing why he's not a finishing threat and why his fights suck a lot, because he doesn't want to take any kind of risks to go the extra mile. So I think you're right. I think this fight is going to be dog awful. But I'm going to watch because I'm going to root for Yoel Romero to do something spectacular.
Yes, it'd be cool if he does that to Phil Davis and we bow down at the feet of Romero.
Yes.
We bow down at the soldier of God. He is officially our violence king for eternity. But more likely, this is going to empty the crowd. It's going to empty the building, and you're going to see a level of social distancing that will make it look like it was the early part of last year when crowds only just started getting back in. But I feel like they could have just done Romero versus Augusto, because that fight against Anthony Johnson was so good that screw it. I want to see him still fighting big, better opposition. Or I wouldn't have minded if they had Romero up at heavyweight. Like, screw it.
Yeah.
Do something nutty.
I love that idea. Let's do it. That's fantastic. I really dig it.
It's like, how did we end up with Yoel Romero and Phil Davis and Fedor fighting Tim Johnson? Like, I thought Bellator, and they've done a lot of good things over the last several months, and especially these Grand Prix, but Bellator is supposed to be the fun promotion. These are not fun fights.
They're really not. Now, I understand why Fedor, because this is his swan song and they let him choose whoever he wanted. Okay, fine. I'll give you that. But this Romero Davis fight, so I'm not real fond of it. But anyways, let's jump forward to a fight that we're all looking forward to. But before we do that, I do want to direct your attention over to YouTube, because we could use some extra subscribers over on YouTube. So please go to the search bar on YouTube, type in Bloody Elbow Presents, and you get yourself just tons and tons of free content. We do stuff 6 days a week, even on the off weeks, but we also have extra features in there too. We put out so much stuff. I mean, if you just go over there and check it out, you are bound to find something that is for you. So please do that. Hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell button too, because that will tell you when the new episodes are out. Oh my goodness. I hate to be the bearer of bad tidings, but Mookie has dubbed me the bearer of bad tidings today. Since losing his middleweight title to Israel Adesanya back in 2019, Robert Whittaker has put together a fantastic run of wins to become the division's best title contender. He got the victory over Darren Till, he got the victory over Jared Cannonier and Kelvin Gastelum, and he cemented his spot as the number one contender. But because he wanted to wait, as I mentioned earlier, an extra month, they went ahead and they stuck Marvin Vettori in there. And Israel Adesanya mowed him down, just walked right through him. And so now they are trying to make this Robert Whittaker, Israel Adesanya Part 2 fight for the title. But guess what's happening? COVID is happening. And so this is what Robert Whittaker's manager has put out in a recent interview with the Daily Telegraph. And I quote, Rob had been told he would be fighting at Madison Square Garden. He says that there have been some issues since, and now it can't happen. Apparently, Adesanya could get into America for the fight, but he wouldn't have been able to get back to New Zealand immediately afterwards because of quarantine restrictions. So while we know the fight is definitely going to happen, it's now a matter of when. And unfortunately, given everything going on with COVID in Australia and New Zealand at the moment, it may not be until early next year. And that is such a bummer, because UFC 268, which is the card that is for Madison Square Garden, is the one that also has Colby Covington facing Kamaru Usman in their rematch. A lightweight bout between Justin Gaethje and Michael Chandler had also been targeted, but Michael Chandler is kind of digging in with getting his COVID vaccination, so that fight might not go through either. So this UFC 268 card that has all the bare bones of being a great card, it's like they're removing one bone at a time, and this skeleton is just going to fall down into a heap of bones now. And I am seriously upset about this, but this is all about COVID restrictions and nothing else. And you know what? I can get by that. If I have to wait until the beginning of next year because these guys want to be able to get back home in a reasonable fashion, I'm okay with that. Who wants to be stuck in another country, a country of dummies at that, after their fight? Nobody. They want to get home. They want to rest, relax, recuperate. You can't do that in America. You know they're going to want to have it in Vegas, especially in Vegas, because Vegas is full of a bunch of dumbasses too. It's almost as bad as Florida and Texas. Not quite, but they're there. They're getting there. You know what I'm saying? So I'm okay with it. I'm really down that I don't get to see it in November, but if it's just a few months after, you know what? If this thing keeps rolling forward, this whole pandemic keeps rolling forward at the rate it's going because of stupid states like mine here in Texas and like Florida, and it doesn't get to happen until a year from now, I'd be okay with that too.
It's just a matter of timing, because everything looked good a few months ago to have these bigger crowds and bigger events. And now you got to wonder if we're going to see some form of capacity restrictions again in certain states, certainly ones with governors and leaders who are less about the obsession over freedom. But for New York, I think I predicted that we would look at Adesanya Whitaker too as the Madison Square Garden main event, but the Delta variant has obviously squashed those plans, and we get Colby and Usman rematching and Gaethje Chandler for the moment. But yeah, it sucks to have to wait a little bit longer for this, but as long as it happens, I think that's what we're hoping for. But you have to think bigger picture. A lot of the city kickboxing guys and anybody from that region, booking them moving forward is going to be a bit of a problem for the next several months, especially with New Zealand has still been very consistent with their border restrictions and their lockdowns. And we see that the way that they operate, Australia and New Zealand, I think, has still had zero community COVID cases over the last however many days, weeks. But in Australia, if you have 4 or 5 cases pop up, lock down everybody for 2 weeks or however many days.
But you have to look at it like this. Didn't they have quite an outbreak there last year? And I think that they're trying to prevent something like that from happening again, because they had a period where they had like this explosion of cases and they locked everything down and they were swift. And I think that they saw the success that had. And now anytime 2 cases pop up, they're ready to put the hammer down. You kind of have to understand that they're trying to keep everything clean and safe. So I don't know that I disagree with that right now, especially with how virulent these new strains are. I mean, it's not just the Delta strain. Now there's a Lambda strain. I mean, there's so many different strains that are popping up, each one worse than the last one. And it is absolutely bonkers.
Well, I got to say, political leaders, certainly in a lot of the more colonial powers, the big military powers, they've got a lot of blood on their hands for the way that they've handled this pandemic. But also this thing has gone wild in poorer countries as well. And then we make things worse by not distributing the vaccines there in the first place. We've got a lot of vaccines, more than there are people, and we're just letting them spoil.
Look what's going on with Cuba. I mean, we should be ashamed of ourselves.
Yeah, and they didn't waive the patent. So Cuba, absolutely, we could give them extra vaccines. I think they've got their own vaccine. And yet here we are. It's just you can't play politics with so many people's lives. But as it pertains to the fight world, I would not be surprised if we start seeing over these next several weeks a couple of other stories like this in which, hey, we would like to fight on this date, or the UFC wanted us to fight on this date, but because of COVID, we can't even go to Fight Island. But especially not the U.S. That's a non-starter. I mean, think about what happened at the start of the year in Abu Dhabi and Dan Hooker.
Yeah.
And he got the Michael Chandler fight, but he trains his ass off. He goes to Abu Dhabi. He gets quickly knocked out, and he can't go back to his family just in the blink of an eye.
He had to wait over a month to go home.
Yeah, so that's the reality for fighters in certain parts of the world. And New Zealand and Australia have been billed as quote unquote success stories. New Zealand certainly a lot more than Australia. Kind of been closer to wanting COVID zero than just living with the virus.
Yeah, but New Zealand is much smaller than Australia. So there's also that. But there's an aspect that we have not looked at here, and we were just talking about it. The UFC's champions, they're replaceable. And if they're not replaceable, they're interimable. You know what I'm saying? So Izzy and Rob can't fight. Oh my God, we need to put up a title fight immediately. All right, interim time, you and you, let's go. This could also be a reality as well.
That is very true. Just think about what we just did with this nonsense interim heavyweight title fight. There would be a semi-justifiable reason to do an interim middleweight title fight if they can't do the fight where they want to anytime soon, even well into 2022. It's a good thing Volkanovski is probably stateside training for this fight and just finished wrapping up tough, because he got COVID several months ago. If he had gotten it now, then there's no way this fight can happen the rest of this year. But still, the international fighters, it's going to be a very different story these next few weeks. And we've seen it. We've seen a lot of fights fall through, not just because of COVID positives, but these visa issues. I got to think some of them are COVID related.
Yeah. How many American champions do we have? We have Rose, we have Aljamain, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so I mean,
that's it. I mean, Moreno's Mexican, so that's 125, 145 Volkanovski, Australian. So, or is he New Zealand? I think he's Australian.
he's Australian. And then at 55, we have
Oliveira.
Oliveira.
Usman is American pretty much.
Yeah.
From Nigeria. So we can add him there because he's been here most of his life. 185, Adesanya, New Zealand, and 205, you got Big Jan. Heavyweights is Ngannou. And on the women's side, you mentioned Rose, but then at women's flyweight, Shevchenko. And then Nunes is a champ, but she just got COVID.
Yeah.
So there you go.
You could call her American as well since she resides in Florida, but she's got COVID. Well, had COVID. And that fight, we don't even know when that's going to be rebooked.
Yep. So, and also, who's to say you can't get COVID twice? Lamar Jackson of the Baltimore Ravens did. Mm-hmm. And he's still hesitant about getting the vaccine, which tells you
everything you need to know.
Everything you need to know there. It's not just the UFC people. Don't think we're beating up on them. There's a lot of athletes. We got to come to grips with the fact that athletes tend to be a little bit irrational, especially when they're so focused on that one thing, which is being great at what they do. But anyway, let's move on to a UFC departure. Now, normally unranked fighters, especially those with unremarkable records, we don't really give too much attention to. But Kai Kamaka III, he hasn't been just full on cut, but his contract is up and they decided not to renew. So it's a parting of ways. Now, Kamaka beat Tony Kelly by decision in his debut, a really fun fight. But these next three fights he ended up losing. And the most recent fights, the TJ Brown fight, which I'm pretty sure was a bad decision. And then the Danny Chavez fights, he was going to win that fight if not for the point deduction and a justifiable point deduction for all the fouling he did. So he goes 1-2-1, and he's out of the promotion at just 26 years old. He's got experience fighting at Bellator, Legacy, and King of the Cage. But the real story here is his coach, Eric Nixick of Extreme Couture, who tweeted out, "For all of you young fighters out there, keep this in mind. Kai Kamaka goes 1-2-1 in the UFC. 3 of the 4 fights were short notice fights. Just because you're doing, quote, the company a favor doesn't necessarily mean it comes full circle when it's renegotiation time." And then he followed up with, "Or how about our guy, Justin James? Fights Camacho on 2 days notice. Fights Gavin Tucker on 3 weeks notice and cuts to 145. Gabe Benitez on 2 weeks notice. I can't remember the Smith. It might have been Devontae Smith on 3 days notice. And then he gets a full camp for Charles Rosa. Gets cut on his birthday. Hashtag it's only business." So the story here is really Nixick, because I don't think we're just going to be up in arms like, oh my God, not Kai Kamaka. But he's a fun fighter. I'm sure he can be back in the UFC because he's so young. But the point here is Nixick's, which is, yeah, you're doing the company a favor by saving somebody else's spot on the card. But if you're not winning, then they just chuck you out. And that's the harsh reality. So you got to sympathize with Kamaka and Justin James that, yeah, they're taking a lot of these opportunities to get a paycheck first and foremost, but they're getting these short notice fights and there's no reward for that. And we've seen this time and time again, but it's so prevalent now because of just how many fights are getting canceled, especially in this COVID era.
You cannot come into the UFC a fresh fighter, a young fighter, right off the regional circuit. You can't come in and turn down fights. That's just not, it's not feasible because they'll stick you on a shelf indefinitely and run your contract out. I mean, we've seen them cut fighters on one loss. So you just can't say no. Kai Kamaka is an exciting fighter. I bet that if he had full training camps, he would have won at least one, maybe all of those fights. But he never got the opportunity. And it's not just the low-ranked fighters either. You can't say no as a higher-ranked fighter. Now, obviously, the creme de la creme, the top 5 guys, can have a little bit more leverage, but anybody below number 5, you don't have much leverage. You take what they offer, or you get pulled underneath the wheels of the bus. We've seen Dana White do that too. Oh, he refused this fight and this fight and this fight. He talked about Justin Gaethje like that. He's talked about Colby Covington like that. You can't do that. Big Francie wanted to take a little extra time to spend with his family because he was fighting, and training a lot. What did they do? They go, sure, you take as much time as you need. We'll go ahead and keep business moving forward without you. what made my day when Cyril Gahn got into that post-fight presser, and the first thing they asked him, what are you going to do? I'd like to take a few months off to be with my family. Oh, my goodness. That was wonderful. Wonderful. Big points for Cyril Gahn. But you just can't say no when you're the Kai Kamakas of the world.
You can't, and neither Justin James. Now, in James's case, what you left out there is the fact that, or what Nixick left out there, is it's a 4-fight losing streak, and it, for the most part, 4-fight losing streak, regardless of how many days notice you have, is going to get you cut. There are only a handful of fighters I can think of who can last that long and not get cut. But the point is still there in the sense that he took a few of those fights on short notice. There's only the Rosa fight that he got a full camp, and unfortunately, he kind of did it to himself because he had Charles Rosa hurt in that last round, and he had him on the cusp of knockout, and he shot for a takedown for God knows what reason, and he ends up losing a decision. But with Smith and Benitez and Tucker, those are 3 really good opponents to fight on short notice. The Camacho fight was a big upset at the time because nobody really heard of Justin James, and he comes in and knocks out Camacho, having not fought in 11 months. But it's not just you can't turn down fights. This is also the issue of the win bonus too. You don't get anything extra really if you take a short notice fight. And
that too is the rub. The win bonuses. When are we going to get rid of these? We need a flat purse. Keep the performance bonuses. Those are great. But the win bonuses, you're robbing your fighters. Come on.
Yeah, that's going to have to be an MMA standard, starting with the UFC, and then, I hate to use this term, trickle down to other promotions. But otherwise, it's just
channeling Ronald Reagan here.
Yes. That's stupid bullshit that anybody still believes in 2021. But yeah, the win bonuses have got to go, because look at Kamaka. That TJ Brown fight should have been his. Doesn't get a win bonus. The Chavez fight, he didn't win. It's a draw. But you don't get half your win bonus. You get nothing. And in fact, that means the UFC gets to keep both of their win bonuses.
Yeah. Oh, that's horrible. Horrible.
It is horrible. So with Kamaka and James, if you keep your head up, and hopefully they can get back into the UFC via the regional circuit. But Eric Nixick, I'm sure, is going to be on the UFC's bad side for saying that. Indeed,
but I think he's looking out for his fighters. I mean, there's a reason he got 2020's Coach of the Year.
As he should. He should be looking out for his fighters. And also the UFC has got this mantra, always be ready. So they don't care, even if it is on short notice, they assume you got to be ready to get accept a fight on a moment's notice. So if you aren't, then tough shit. So for Kamaka and James, they didn't win enough to the UFC's liking, even though they were certainly very fun fighters to watch.
Yes, they were.
Yep. So let's wrap up this show with a couple of items for social media. One is the knockout of the week to me from Showtime's card in California, Roche Warren, who pretty much never knocks anybody out. He had a knockout, and the only knockout on the main card, against Damian Vasquez. And it was so unusual to watch because it's a hard left hand, and the way Vasquez went down, it's like, remember when McGregor did his weird flapping arms thing before the Mayweather fight in his training? This looked like a slow motion version of that. Yes, his noodle arms. Yes, instead of the noodle arms, Vasquez, you got to set that knockout to music. It looks like he's on the dance floor. Yeah. And good on the ref for catching him before he could faceplant. Exactly, because he was headed for a broken nose if he didn't already have one. That was unfortunately the only entertainment on that card, because the co-main event, Manny Rodriguez and Gary Antonio Russell, and he's the brother of Gary Russell Jr. Yeah. A 16-second headbutt, no contest. Yeah, that was terrible. What was going on there? But if it were MMA, I see that's the rule that I would love to have done away with. I want headbutts in MMA, not in boxing, but in MMA, yeah. Oh, Bernard Hopkins would come out of retirement and train for MMA right away. Wouldn't he, though? Yes. But what was terrible was the Rigondeaux-Casimiro fight. Worst. Oh, my God. That was... What did people expect? When Rigo fights, it is 9 times out of 10 atrocious television. He's a brilliant boxer. That doesn't make him exciting to watch, even if you try to hipster your way into saying, but look at their footwork and their feints. I like watching people get punched. 91 combined punches landed over 36 minutes between those two. That is
awful. And remember the days when the rumor was and I don't even know if this is true. I want to believe that it's true. They said that Bruce Lee was so fast in his movies they had to slow down the film so that you could actually see it. But with Rigando, I feel like we need to speed the film up in order to make watchable Rigando fights.
It was a fight so bad that I tried to be upset that he didn't get the decision, but realized by him not winning, that means we don't have to see him in title fights anymore.
No
and
more.
Casemiro can go get his ass whooped by one of Donaire or Inoue or somebody else, because Casemiro looked like a really unpolished fighter out there. But 91 punches over 36 minutes for bantamweights. That's 2.5 punches average landed a round. Like the punch stats for each round that they showed on the Showtime graphic look like really good golf scores. You know, you got a one here, you got a hole in one, you got an eagle, you got a birdie. But as far as actual violence, ironically, in a place affectionately known as War Grounds, good Lord, that was awful. I wish that we had covered the Virgil Ortiz fight. I didn't have time for it, but the Virgil Ortiz fight against Mean Machine, Virgil got rocked in the second round of that fight, but just like Crawford did against Mean Machine, but he came back and he got 5 knockdowns in his favor to win. And he called out Bud Crawford. And I say Golden Boy might have some issues post Canelo, but 2 guys clearly stand out for them, Ryan Garcia and Virgil Ortiz. I think Virgil.
Yeah, I like that. I think Virgil has the much better chance.
Oh, yes. 18-0, 18 knockouts, still like 24 years old. He is a phenomenal talent. He is one of my favorite fighters to watch. And he draws a crowd. I mean, the fans loved him in Texas. I think that was in Frisco. And if he gets that Crawford fight or he gets the Crawford-Porter winner, I give him a shot to win.
Yep, me too. Less of a shot against Bud, but still a shot.
Yeah, I forgot to mention, Rigo was so throwing the shade on Twitter. He talked about you got a great Filipino boxing champion. His name is Pacquiao. I mean, he was throwing shade at Casemiro afterward, throwing more shade after the fact than he actually threw in the fight.
Why is he so exciting on Twitter but not in his fights?
Yes, it makes you think. But yeah. No more Rigo on TV, ever. Nope. So something else happened on TV, CCTV. UFC welterweight Jordan Williams. He had an interesting encounter because he was going into a convenience store and he went inside. Somebody noticed that he went inside and he felt now's a good time to go steal the man's car. But Williams saw to it. He saw the man try and steal his car. He ran outside, opened the door, and then took him out of the car. He did not beat him up. And that was the only disappointing bit. But the guy just meekly ran away. And Williams was also sporting a fanny pack, too.
I like that he didn't beat him up because that could have left him open for some sort of charges. Because we know that this litigious society, that dude would have turned around and said, well, I saw a puppy in there, or I thought I saw a baby in there. It doesn't matter if there wasn't one in there, but he could have said that that's why he jumped into the car, and then he gets dragged out and beaten to a pulp by the car's owner. That, to me, is what could have happened. So I'm kind of glad that he didn't beat him up, even though he could. To me, that speaks to a bit of restraint, and I like that. I think it's great.
Yeah, is this not like the second or third time somebody has tried in the last few months? Somebody has tried to steal a UFC fighter's vehicle.
Yep, we've seen. There was a girl, right? A female fighter that had somebody trying to steal something from her. Remember? A motorcycle.
I think it was in Brazil.
Yes,
it was a Brazilian fighter. And then didn't Derek Lewis also have to?
Yep.
Lay down the law, put on some street justice.
Yes. In Derek Lewis's case, we give him a pass.
Yep. So you could see the encounter on Jordan's Instagram, Bomaye MMA, and he also explained, if you're wondering why my car was still on, it's the same reason why you couldn't drive away. I have a push to start, and my car won't go unless the keys are within 5 feet of it, and I had them on me always. But he said after the fact. So you can still drive without the fob. Yeah. So lucky I got there in time, and he didn't know how to release the parking brake.
It's the foot thing down at the bottom. It's the little pedal down at the bottom.
Yep, he said, wish I would have hit him with the trip after the clinch work when I tossed him out of the whip and finished off with some ground and pound, but I'll settle with getting my car back. Also, I know you see the stillness of that fanny pack. Fanny pack game was on point. This could be a commercial for them.
You know what? I wonder how many people ran out and got fanny packs because that dude made them look cool.
Yes. So good for Jordan Williams. He's not been getting W's in the UFC, but this is a W in life, and it might not cost. It might not gain him money, but at least it's something where he doesn't lose his car for no particular good reason. Man, just people are just out of their minds with these efforts to steal things and knowing how many cameras there are.
Right. And cameras everywhere these days. I mean, everybody and their mama has a Ring. There's security cameras everywhere. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing these days.
Some things are good for cameras. Other things are bad for cameras, such as whenever I'm on. But anyway, that's it for this week's show. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Mookie Alexander, Steffi at Crooklyn MMA, and the show itself at Mookie and Crookie. We are on Facebook at facebook.com/Mookie and Crookie. You can listen to me and Steffi alongside Victor Rodriguez on the Level Change podcast every Friday. You'll hear our UFC Vegas 34 picks and more in that episode. I don't think we're going to pick PFL because that's the Kayla Harrison main event. And that's a freebie. And maybe we'll pick Congo Karatana, but I'm on the fence about that. Anyway, Steffi's on Care Don't Care with Eugene S. Robinson and John Nash on Mondays. There could not have been that many cares for this one.
Three.
That's it.
Yeah, that was the most cares. Two of us had 3, one of us had 2.
Well, you know what that means. You better hope that if they're going to be canceled fights, we don't end up with the first ever, wow, it's a Care Don't Care where 0 of the fights that you cared about are still happening.
Right? We did have one where that we cared about like 4 fights and 3 of them got pulled.
Oh, boy. Normally, I'm supposed to be the one to curse it. This could be the Care Don't Care curse. Curse, Don't curse.
Yes, curse, don't curse.
All right. So if you want to know where else you can find Bloody Elbow Presents podcast, just wait till the very end. You'll get me talking about the full list in the pre-recorded outro. So until next time, please be safe. Don't be stupid. Join us again next week. Thank you for listening to this Bloody Elbow Presents production. To check out more of our content, hop over to the Bloody Elbow Presents SoundCloud and iTunes pages, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is also titled Bloody Elbow Presents. We're also on Apple TV, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn, Overcast, Player FM, and Amazon Music. Just search for Bloody Elbow Presents, and you'll get brand new shows throughout the week, including Care Don't Care, The Mookie and Crookie Show, the Best of the Come On Now MMA podcast, Crooklyn's Corner, the MMA Vivisection, the Level Change podcast, Show Money, the 6th Round Post-Fight Show, 6th Round Retro, the MMA Depressed Us, and radio-style play-by-play for every UFC pay-per-view. You can also follow us on Twitter at Bloody Elbow and on Facebook at facebook.com/BloodyElbowBlog, and of course on BloodyElbow.com.